22. I'm joined by GOP Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel. Good morning, Madam Chairwoman. Great to have you back on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Always great to be with you, Hugh. Thanks for having me.
I just had Josh Kraushaar of Axios on, and I presented him the Rawlsian test. If he had to pick a red card or a blue card in the House and in the Senate, not knowing which race, just that it was one of the competitive ones, which one would he want? In both cases, he picked the red card, meaning that the general environment is pretty good. How do you feel about the beginning of the campaign season?
Yeah, I feel optimistic. I think coming into September, voters are dialing in, and Biden last week with his divisive speech as he stood in front of the American people, fear mongering and not talking about any achievements from his administration instead of just attacking Republicans. I think it bodes well that they don't have anything to run on, and Republicans have a lot to run on.
3 weeks ago, he was calling Republicans semi-fascist. 2 weeks ago, he unloaded up to $1 trillion in debt for student loan bailouts. Last week, there was the red-setting speech, which was a disaster. And then yesterday, the Senate candidate for the Democrats in Wisconsin wouldn't show up with him. Tell me about those four omens, Ronna McDaniel. How do you read those?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that Mandela Barnes wouldn't show up with him, that Democrats are fleeing Biden, his numbers are terrible. I think everybody saw his speech as divisive. Remember, this is a president who gave an inaugural address talking about unifying Americans and we need to bring people together, and how quickly it has devolved 2 years later into him calling half the country fascist and an enemy of the democracy. So I think all of that shows Democrats are not feeling good about campaigning with Joe Biden, and Republicans are looking good heading into this midterms. But we can't take anything for granted. You know, the Democrats have big tech, they have the media. The media carries Joe Biden's talking points to a T, and we need to be vigilant and get out and support our candidates, support them financially, volunteer, and do everything we can to win in these midterms.
Now, Republicans are talking about affordability. They're referring to inflation in groceries and gas and generally in rent and in cost of living. They're talking about crime because people are genuinely scared to go into different places or places they do not know, and not even in their own homes are they resting secure. They're talking about immigration and the collapse at the border. They're talking about a lot of things. Democrats talk about abortion, then they talk about abortion, then they talk about abortion. Republicans can talk about abortion, but they really do want to stay on the pocketbook issues because it's been a disaster for Americans. What are you advising candidates to talk most about?
Well, the economy is the number one thing on people's minds, and affordability, like you said, not just groceries and gas, but rent, insurance, everything is up. Every single place you look as a homeowner, as a hardworking American, things are costing more for you right now, and that's because of the Biden administration. So that's number one. Crime is a big issue. I'll tell you what, Hugh, education is a big issue. We are now learning about the deficits our children have faced coming out of the pandemic, being kept out of the classroom. We know about the mental health issues. And we just watched Joe Biden say, you know what, instead of helping the kids we left behind, we're going to try and buy votes from kids who've already graduated from Harvard and Yale by giving them loan forgiveness. That's wrong. And I think that is really turning the tide for us with a lot of voters who fundamentally feel like this loan forgiveness is unfair and the wrong priority for the Biden administration, especially when we know millions of kids left the classroom and there's been chronic absenteeism and there's a huge education crisis in this country with kids facing deficits that will impact their ability to have a living and make the money they would have made if Democrats hadn't locked their states down.
You know, Ronna, Brett Baer was telling me a couple of weeks ago on his show that it seemed to him that the Democrats have made a big bet. Their big bet is on semi-fascist and fascism in the red setting speech, and that they're just going to stick with this despite the overwhelming rejection of it. I don't think they are sticking with underlining the student loan bailout because the president has had 3 opportunities to talk about that. He did not talk about it in the red setting speech. He just didn't even, a week earlier, this was the greatest thing since sliced bread. They got a week of blowback from ordinary Americans saying, are you out of your mind? And then they've dropped it, but it's too late. It's $1 trillion and it's inflationary.
It's too late. And what we've seen, Hugh, since then is Herschel Walker took a lead in a poll in Georgia. We've seen Laxalt within 1, O'Day in Colorado within 1. We're seeing movement after that decision that the Democrats made to pay off $1 trillion in student loan debt for people who willingly took that debt on, right? But our kids, and I'm one of them, who were kept out of the classroom, who had no choice, who couldn't get the education they deserved, they're behind in math. They're behind on their SAT and ACT scores, and it's going to impact them for their lives. And Democrats said, we're going to pay off these loans because maybe this will lead to votes, instead of helping these kids who our policies have left behind and made them collateral damage because of our loyalty to the public unions and the teacher unions. Not the teachers are working hard. It's the unions that the Democrats are beholden to. And the unions definitely show they don't care about our kids.
I urge my audience every day, Ronna McDaniel, do not vote for one school board incumbent in any district anywhere. Whether there's R or D or no, they're usually nonpartisan races. Not one incumbent unless you're absolutely certain that they are adamant against making masks non-mandatory and never closing school again. That was the biggest disaster. And by the way, England did not make that disaster. I was blessed to have a grandson and a granddaughter in English schools for a year because the Navy sent my son-in-law and daughter there for a year, and they got to go to school. It was a completely self-inflicted wound because of the school teachers' unions and the fact that Democrats in Congress, Patty Murray yesterday wouldn't back down in Dana Bash interview. She would not admit error.
No, and it was done in Democrat states. Listen, my brother lives in Florida. His kids, my nieces, they were in school. My son in Michigan was not. The difference between what they were able to do, their high school experience, was so profound. But look at these SAT scores. Look at what the deficits are for the kids in the lockdown states versus the states that were open. And the states that were open were run by Republican governors. And those are the states that are leading the charge, not just on education, but on jobs recovered, on economic opportunity. Those are the states that are really doing well. So if you want to look at what Republican policies do versus Democrat policies, go look at states by Republican governors.
Now, Democrats do want to talk about nothing but abortion. I'm very happy with the Dobbs decision. It returns the decision to the state legislatures where it ought to be. California is not going to be Ohio, is not going to be Connecticut, is not going to be Florida. I think the Florida compromise may, in fact, end up being the majority position of state legislatures, but I don't know. But I also don't believe Democrats are going to gain any, because voters are smart. They know this is no longer a federal issue.
Yeah, it's going to be returned to the voters. Voters will make the decision what's best for their state through their legislature. And like you said, Mississippi is different than California. And by the way, nothing's changed in California. California, you can still go get an abortion on a baby's due date, which I think most Americans absolutely believe that there should be limitations. And that is where the Democrat Party refuses to engage. They cannot say, when is it enough? When should there be a limitation? Don't you think the day that the baby can be born, when someone can adopt that baby, that it is a life, that it is feeling pain, that we shouldn't be allowing abortion? Choice is over at that point, and Democrats won't engage. And it's going to end up being a compromise and consensus across every state, but it is a 10th Amendment issue, and it should not have been adjudicated at the Supreme Court level.
Let me close by talking about the media with you, Ronna McDaniel. I'm looking at an NBC story by Henry Gomez, pretty good reporter, then John Allen, Natasha Korecki, Sahil Kapoor, and Adam Edelman. And the rest of those are all lefties. And it's just nuts. It's like they were doing peyote last night. They say the Republicans are in trouble in the Senate and they had a summer slump. Dr. Oz has closed. As you mentioned, Joe Day has closed. Blake Masters has closed. Herschel Walker is ahead in 2 polls. And I don't care about the specifics of polls, the only direction, because they never polled Republicans correctly. This is just nuts, but the media will not relent. I don't expect them to relent a minute in the next 63 days.
No, because they're trying to depress fundraising for Republicans and increase optimism for their Democrat candidates, like Fetterman, who's a socialist. So what I would say to everyone listening, go give to J.D. Vance and Oz and Herschel and Adam Laxalt and Ted Budd and Tiffany Smiley and Joe O'Dea and support these candidates.
And Blake Masters. You forgot one. Blake Masters.
I'm sorry I forgot Blake. I'm going to be with Blake, who's doing a great job. But we have great candidates. And the media is setting up this narrative because they want to depress fundraising. The one place they do have an advantage is fundraising. So everyone needs to get out $5, $10, whatever you can do to support these candidates. It will help them absolutely get their message across and win these races.
Ronna McDaniel, thank you. Keep coming back at GOP Chairwoman. If you want to follow Ronna, and you've got to follow her She keeps up a travel schedule unlike any other for the next 60 days.